Good evening, Virgo. They did not disappear. I know that is what it looks like from where you are standing. I know the silence has a quality to it that the mind, in the absence of information, tends to fill with the worst available interpretation. The unreturned message, the conversation that went quiet at a moment that did not feel like a natural ending. The specific and particular torture of a presence that was there and then, without explanation, was not leaving behind it a silence so loud it has its own texture, its own weight, its own way of pressing against the chest at 3 in the morning when the defenses are down and the mind runs free. You have been living inside that silence. And what the silence has been telling you, the story it has been constructing in the absence of actual information, may be almost entirely wrong. That is what I need you to hear before anything else. Before the explanation, before the unpacking of what is actually happening on the other side of the quiet, I need you to hear that the story the silence told is not the true story. That the narrative the mind builds when it is left without facts, the one that tends with a consistency that says more about human psychology than about any particular situation, to settle on the most painful available interpretation, is working from a false premise. The premise that silence means absence, that quiet means indifference, that the person who is not reaching out is not reaching out because they do not care. The premise is wrong. What I feel on the other side of this silence, in the energy of the person whose absence has been so loud in your life, is not emptiness. Not the clean, uncomplicated nothing of someone who has simply moved on without looking back. What I feel is the opposite of emptiness, a fullness, a crowded, complicated, thoroughly occupied interior state that has very little room in it for anything except the specific and consuming weight of what this person is currently moving through. And you, the thought of you, the feeling of you, the unresolved and very much alive question of you are present in that interior state in a way that indifference simply does not produce. Soft sigh. Indifference is light. It does not consume energy. It does not keep people awake. It does not produce the specific quality of internal preoccupation that I am reading in this person's energy. The circling, the returning, the inability to place the thought of you down and leave it somewhere that does not require tending. What produces that is not indifference. What produces that is something considerably more alive than indifference, considerably more difficult to manage, considerably more insistent on being acknowledged, even when acknowledgement is inconvenient. So, why the silence? That is the question. The one you have been asking in every quiet moment, in every iteration of a conversation you have rehearsed with someone who was not there to respond. And the answer, the actual answer, not the one the silence suggested, is something I want to speak to with care because it is more complex than the simple narrative of ghosting allows for. And you deserve the complexity rather than the simplification. Something is happening in this person's life, something internal, a reckoning of some kind. a process that is consuming them from the inside in a way that has made reaching out feel impossible. Not impossible because they do not want to reach out. Impossible because they are not yet, in whatever place they currently inhabit emotionally, able to show up in the way they want to show up for you. And showing up inadequately, arriving at your door with less than what they feel they owe you, less than what they believe the situation requires of them, feels worse to them in this specific season than the alternative of waiting until they can arrive more fully. That is not ghosting. That is someone who cares enough about what they bring to you to be unwilling to bring something diminished, which is its own kind of honoring imperfect. Yes. Painful in its execution, absolutely. Failing to account for what the silence costs you on your side, undeniably. But rooted at its core, not in indifference, but in a form of regard that simply has not yet found the right shape to express itself through. In the old symbolic traditions, there is a figure that governs exactly this kind of internal withdrawal, the hermit, alone on the mountain, not because the world below does not matter, but because something requires the kind of attention that only solitude can provide. Carrying a lamp, not to signal anyone, not yet, but to see by, to find their own way through something that must be navigated before the descent becomes possible. The mountain is not abandonment. The mountain is the necessary interior work that some people can only do in silence, in withdrawal, in the specific and sometimes maddening privacy of a process that has no room for an audience, yet not even an audience of one. This person is on their mountain. And the work they are doing there, however invisible to you, however difficult to distinguish from simple absence, involves you more than the silence suggests. You are part of what is being worked through, not as a problem to be solved or a chapter to be closed, as something that matters enough to require this quality of private attention before it can be approached honestly. Now I want to speak to what this means for you, because you are not simply waiting passively on the other side of someone else's process. You are a person with your own interior life, your own needs, your own entirely legitimate requirement for clarity in a situation that has been denying you clarity. And the fact that their silence may have a reason does not obligate you to absorb it without cost, does not require you to hold yourself in suspension indefinitely while another person completes a process on their own timeline, does not mean your need for communication, for presence, for the basic human decency of being told what is happening is unreasonable. It is not unreasonable. It is one of the most reasonable things available, and holding both truths simultaneously, that their silence has a reason and that you deserve better than silence, is the specific and difficult work of this moment. Not choosing one truth over the other, holding both. Because here is what I feel approaching in the energy between you and this person, and I want to speak to this carefully with the honest suggestiveness that this kind of reading demands, rather than the false certainty that would be easier to offer. The silence may be approaching its end. Not because I can see a specific timeline. I cannot and I will not pretend otherwise. But because the quality of the energy on their side is shifting, the internal process that produced the withdrawal seems to be finding slowly some form of resolution. The mountain work reaching a point where the descent becomes possible, where the thing that needed to be worked through has been worked through sufficiently that showing up is no longer the impossible proposition it was. Something is preparing to move in the direction of you with a quality of intention that is different from anything that was available before the withdrawal, more honest, perhaps, because the process that the withdrawal enabled has produced a quality of honesty that was not accessible before it. More clear, more grounded in the actual truth of what they feel rather than in the managed, carefully maintained version of feeling that people present when they have not yet done the interior work of understanding what they actually carry. Soft sigh, but I also want to speak to what you do in the meantime, because the meantime is real. The waiting is real, and the specific daily accumulating cost of waiting for someone who has not given you sufficient information to know what you are waiting for that is real too, and it deserves to be treated as real rather than minimized in favor of understanding and patience that may have already been extended past their reasonable limit. You are allowed to have a limit. Even understanding the reason for the silence, even holding the complexity of what is happening on their side with genuine care and genuine compassion, you are allowed to know clearly and without apology what you are and are not willing to sustain, what timeline feels acceptable to you, what quality of presence you require from the people in your life, what you will and will not continue to hold space for in the absence of reciprocal effort. Those limits are not ultimatums dressed in softer language. They are the natural boundaries of a person who understands their own worth, who has decided through whatever process of self-knowledge the recent season has enabled that the version of themselves that waits indefinitely for someone else to decide they are ready is not the version they are willing to continue being. And your worth is not contingent on their timeline. Your value does not increase or decrease based on how quickly or slowly someone else processes their own interior state. The specific and irreplaceable quality of who you are exists independently of whether it is being actively witnessed by the person you wish were witnessing it. It simply is, as it has always been, as it will continue to be, regardless of what the silence resolves into. And from that place, the place of your own uncontingent worth, the silence looks different than it does from the place of wondering what it means about you. From that place, it is simply what it is, another person's process, legitimate in its need and imperfect in its execution, approaching whatever it is approaching at the pace it is approaching it, not a verdict, not a measure, not evidence of anything about you except that you are someone whose presence in another person's life produces enough weight, enough significance, enough of the specific gravity of something that genuinely matters to require this quality of private attention before it can be addressed. You are not being ghosted. You are being processed, which is in some ways more complicated, and in the most important ways, the ways that speak to what you actually mean to this person, considerably more significant. What comes out the other side of this silence when it ends, in whatever way it ends, through whatever channel the words or the presence finally find their way to, you will carry the specific quality of something that was not offered lightly. was not offered casually, was not offered until the person offering it had done enough work to offer it honestly. And honest offerings, even late ones, even ones that arrive after a silence that costs more than it should have, carry a weight that the easier, earlier, less processed versions of the same thing rarely manage to hold. Wait if the waiting still makes sense for you. Stop waiting if it does not. But know, in either case, on either path, regardless of what you choose and when, that the silence was never about your inadequacy, never about your worth, never about you being someone who does not merit the effort of a response. It was always about them, about their own interior landscape and what it required, about a process that was never yours to manage, however much the silence made it feel like yours to carry. Whew. Put it down. The carrying of what was never yours, the interpreting of a silence that was not a message about you, the quiet, exhausting, daily work of trying to read meaning into an absence that had its own meaning separate from anything you did or failed to do. Put it down and stand in what is actually true, which is that you are here, whole, clear, entirely sufficient for everything that is coming, whether what is coming is their return or your own forward movement into something that does not require you to wait. Either one is a valid destination. Either one is available to someone who knows their worth clearly enough to move toward what is real rather than remaining suspended in what is uncertain. The truth of what was really going on is this: you were never forgotten. You were never dismissed. You were held quietly in a mind that could not yet find the words, in a heart that could not yet find the courage, in an interior process that needed to complete itself before it could become anything visible. And you, on this side of the silence, having carried it with more grace than it deserved, are still here, still whole, still worth every word that is forming slowly on the other side of the quiet. If this reached you tonight at exactly the moment you needed it, if something here finally gave language to what the silence could not stay close, subscribe and come back. Because the story that is still unfolding between you and this silence deserves to be witnessed all the way through to its most honest resolution. And the next reading will be there when it arrives.